But let's refrain from applause during the forum, to not show favor or to tilt. Barb, you want to introduce them?
Sure, three of my closest friends are up here in front, and we have Herb and Nancy and Brandon, who are all running for 2 seats. So do the math if you may. Okay, so I'm going to get started with the first question. How long have you lived in Cannon Beach? Tell us about your history here, and I have to put the glasses on, and how that prepares you to serve on city council. And Herb will answer first.
Well, is this close enough? Can everybody hear? First of all, thank you very much to the organizers for putting this together, and thanks to all of you for being here. The question is, how long have I been in Cannon Beach? And I've been here, let's see, 12 years, I guess now, plus, on a pretty permanent basis. Visited here quite often, starting in the 70s when I came to Oregon to go to college. The why I came down to Cannon Beach is pretty simple. I met my now wife at a party in Portland and decided to move down here. And luckily her family didn't think that my being a sailing instructor at the time was a bad thing and let me come down. I think that how that has prepared me for this, partly the family that I married into was very involved in Cannon Beach, so I got exposed quickly to much of Cannon Beach's processes. I also got some very firm, what's the word, not guidance, but certainly encouragement to become involved in Cannon Beach, and have since been on some committees here and hopefully have been able to contribute. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, same question for Nancy.
Hi, I'm Nancy McCarthy. I'm on the ballot for City Council. I've owned a house in Cannon Beach for 15 years, and I've been a permanent resident since February 2nd, 2007, almost 10 years. I came here as editor of the Cannon Beach Gazette and worked there for about a year before I became a reporter for the Daily Astorian. I covered the South County, so I have experience in Cannon Beach, Seaside, and Gerhardt, and any other place that they wanted to put me at the time. So I covered that for a good 8 years or so. I just retired, but I'm still a freelance writer and still doing quite a few stories for the paper every month. I think that has actually prepared me for being on the City Council. I've had to cover all kinds of stories, from the Stanton Castle contest to elections to some of the most severe issues that we've been experiencing in the past several years. So I think I'm fairly well knowledgeable about what's going on in Cannon Beach. And besides, I love living here, and that is really paramount. That's one reason why I'm running for City Council.
Okay, Brandon.
Hello, my name is Brandon Ogilvie. I've lived in Cannon Beach for about 24 years. I'm currently a contractor in town. I've been a bartender. Been on the planning commission 8 or so years, part-time of that as the planning commission chair. I'm definitely interested in civic involvement. I enjoy it, and thank you very much.
Okay. Wow, my mic is hot. Just in case, if you guys have the feedback happens, if you point them out toward the audience, that might fix it when they're sitting. Question number 2. If you're elected to City Council, what will be your biggest challenge?
Answer 2.
Starting with Nancy.
I think my mic is my mic on? Yeah. I think my biggest challenge will be trying to explain to people who come up to me, challenging me on a decision that I either have to make or I have made, and explaining to them why that decision had to be made the way it was made. I think people are very curious in town. I think they're very involved in town, and they have definite opinions. Everybody in town has come from somewhere else, and usually from a management position or a position of some kind of authority. And they have opinions, and they're used to running things the way they want to run them. And that's fine, that's great, because that means that we have a lot of intelligent, wonderful, creative people here. They may not see things the same way that I might see them as a city councilor. And so trying to explain to them how those decisions were made will probably be my greatest challenge.
Brandon, same question.
I guess having lived here for as long as I have, inevitably a decision will need to be made involving people I know, and having to tell people no or make a decision that involves them directly or their business. But I think of myself as fair-minded and would like to, hear all sides of an issue. So hopefully that'll work out. Thank you.
I kind of knew this was going to happen, but I feel like my answer should be what they said, because I agree. I think one of my biggest challenges would need to be along the lines, I think, of what they had both mentioned. It's to maintain an open mind until a decision's made, to listen to all the sides of any given issue, to be objective, to be fair-minded. I would like to think I can do that. I hope I can, and I would do my best. But I definitely think in this town where you know everyone that is something to be aware of.
Okay, question number 3, and Brandon will start with this one. What do you think are the top 3 issues facing Cannon Beach?
Certainly, the tsunami awareness, I believe, is in the top 3. I'm sorry if I've been a little remiss in understanding every issue that's going on. It seems that short-term rentals is rearing its head again, and currently I'm on the housing task force, and I see that as an issue that's facing the town as well. Other folks may have different opinions about what's most important, but those are 3 that I see as being important and affecting the city. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, your turn.
I agree with those. I think my top 3 issues would be the influx of people as our surrounding urban areas have grown so much, particularly in the summertime. And most definitely part of that, and I think a large part of it, are parking issues here in town that I think need to be addressed. I think sustainability in town in all areas, economic sustainability, sustainability of what Cannon Beach is now, the community feeling that it is, and we, I think, all want it to be, sustainability in terms of emergency preparation. And I think infrastructure certainly should always be a top priority of the city government. So.
Thank you. Nancy?
I think Cannon Beach is at a crossroads right now. We have to decide if we want to maintain the small village arts atmosphere that we have, or if we're going to become a high-end destination resort. I think I know where I stand on that. I'd like to see us preserve our village atmosphere. That's what drew us here in the first place. At least that's what drew me here in the first place, and that's what I enjoy most. So that, I think, is a top issue. I think Herb is right when he talks about the influx of people coming into Cannon Beach, and we really don't have an off-season anymore. So I think we have to think about how do we maintain that balance. I think another issue is affordable housing. If we're going to have the kind of a life that we want, the diversity that we want in the community, we need to find housing that is affordable, find some way of providing that. And I don't mean low-income housing, I mean housing for incomes, median incomes, which in this county is about $52,000 a year. And I do think that our third priority should be emergency planning. I've heard a lot about tsunamis. I've written a lot about tsunamis. We still have a lot to do regarding emergency planning, not just for tsunamis, but for maybe even the storm that's coming this weekend.
Okay, next question, and this one begins with Herb, I believe.
Yes.
Identify a recent city council decision that you feel strongly about.
Wow. I'm not sure that I can identify one that I feel strongly about, because I think that the city council recently, from what I've been able to see, has been deliberative in their approach. What I've watched of them, they're making decisions, listening to input from the citizens. I do think that the city council, in general, and not particularly the individuals that are now there, but more as a matter of principle, I think the city council really has a duty to keep an eye on and guide and monitor the city staff, and I would like to see that happen. But any particular issue, I can't say I can think of one.
I think I'm drawing a blank too, and I attend all the meetings and I'm drawing a blank all of a sudden. Funny how that works. But I think one issue that the city council grappled with recently was the marijuana issue, and whether or not marijuana sales should be allowed in Cannon Beach. Frankly, I support that. I think that since Cannon Beach and Clatsop County and state of Oregon voters approved the sale of marijuana, why should we be a town that says, no, you can't do that? I think there has to be definite rules and regulations. The ordinances have to be pretty strict regarding that. They have to follow pretty strict state regulations, and they also have to follow our own ordinances, including design review. So there is a time, place, and manner ordinance that is being passed by the city council, and I think that needs to be followed strictly. But I don't see any reason why marijuana should not be sold in town.
I see a recent decision on the Nicholson property as being something that I either agree or disagree. I think I would have made the same decision on the planning commission as the planning commission made, but I think it points to a larger issue in that I think it's time to revisit our current comp plan and to look into whether going forward that's the type of decision we'd like to make on other properties, or just how as a city we see our vision for the future. Thank you.
Okay, question number 5. Cannon Beach is a close community. Be they personal or professional, how will you handle conflicts of interest that arise when you're on city council? And Nancy goes first.
I remember when I first came to Cannon Beach, and I used to live in Portland, and I used to write for the Oregonian, and I sometimes didn't know who I was talking to over the phone, so I didn't know who that person was. But when I came to Cannon Beach and I became editor of the newspaper, I realized we all wear many, many hats. And I could be talking to somebody one day about a city issue, and the next day I get to be talking to them about their volunteer activities in the city park. So I realize that we all have conflicts of interest. I think when we face an issue on the city council, we have to say, I may have a conflict of interest, or I may not. The definition of a conflict of interest is if you benefit financially from that decision. And of course you would recuse yourself if that is the case. If you are on one committee, for instance, if I was on the Coaster Theater Board, which I am, and a question came up about the theater board, then I would have to at least mention that I was on the board, and then I would have to decide for myself, and I might even ask my fellow counselors to help me determine whether or not that is a conflict of interest. But everybody has a conflict of interest in this town, so join the crowd.
I think Nancy said that very well. It's very cut and dry in, I think that for individuals on the city council to just state what their conflict of interest is or their interest in the issue at hand, and for them to decide whether they feel they can make an unbiased decision and take it from there. And I feel that's how I'd handle it.
I agree. I think it's actually pretty straightforward. I was on the planning commission for I think 8, maybe plus years, much of it with Brandon. I think there was one time that I had to declare, I didn't have to declare a conflict of interest that was more personal in nature. Somebody I thought I might vote for, and maybe I shouldn't. I wasn't sure I could be fair on that. But if it's a monetary conflict of interest, it's very straightforward. You just recuse yourself, and that's that.
Okay. What's something you've done in this community that will benefit you if elected to the council? And that begins with Brandon.
Well, I certainly think my experience on the planning commission will help. I think my length of time living here in town, I've built up relationships with people. I think I have a fairly good feeling about how things go in town. And I think that's about it.
I would say the planning commission. I was also on the budget committee for 8 and maybe 8+ years, and I'm currently on the E-Prep committee, and just finished getting my certification for the CERT team, which was quite an experience and a very good one. Mostly though, I'd say just talking to people in town and getting to know them, going out to eat and seeing everybody we know all the time, probably is the best part of it.
I think by far, editing the newspaper, I got to know quite a few people in town. I got to know what their issues are. I got to know their personal stories. I got to make a lot of friends, and I actually consider them family. So I think being a reporter for those many years really helped get me to get to know the town. But also I was on the Haystack, Friends of Haystack committee, so I got to know a little bit about the Haystack Rock Awareness Program. And I was on the Farmers Market Committee, and I do volunteer at the Farmers Market, so I've gotten to know how that operates as well. So when there's questions about those 2 committees at least, I can understand what the issues might be. Also, I've attended pretty much every city council meeting in the past 9 years, and many of the other city committees as well.
Okay, question number 7. Before voting, how will you solicit, weigh, and represent the opinions of Cannon Beach citizens in the decision-making process? And you go first, sir.
I had lost track on that one. Getting input. I think from what I've seen, just in this process of being involved and running, people are starting to walk up and offer their input, and certainly that's one way. I think my biggest asset is the ability to just listen to people, whether they're talking to me directly about the issue or I hear it around me. I think that we get some very good commentary in the newspaper, the Daily A and the Gazette, and that's worth paying attention to.
Thank you.
Well, like Herb, I've received phone calls and I've had people come up to me. My stint as a volunteer at the information desk at the Farmers Market became very interesting this summer with people coming up to me to talk to me about various issues going on. So I think I will continue to do that. I think people know us well enough to feel comfortable coming up to us to talk to us, and I will make phone calls if I have to ask questions. How do you feel about this? What is your issue with it, or how would you vote if you had to? I think that the papers do a good job. And I think people are just not afraid to tell us what's going on. So soliciting information and receiving information, as long as we're willing to listen and to talk and to ask questions, we will somehow find the answer.
I think Herb and Nancy said that very well. There are some issues that we can't talk to the public about. You have to make a decision based on the information that's presented to you at the time, and you've had the opportunity to study the issue through the city packet that's produced. I guess I would just like to keep an open mind. I think I have one. And certainly any input that citizens of Cannon Beach would like to give to me, I'm more than willing to listen to. Thank you.
It's fun as we do this. I realize sometimes I wish we could clarify our questions, so I want to ask a follow-up in the same thing. Do you view, the members of City Council's role as, do you view yourselves more as elected to be decision makers or representatives of what you hear? For what your constituents are telling you. Why don't we just start at the top?
I would say both. I think it's really crucial that you listen to input. But as Brandon said, ultimately it comes down to making a decision based on the rules, the laws, and you can take the input and that's a portion of it, but you also have to, I think, consider things like was mentioned earlier, the comprehensive plan. I know that sometimes this is hard in all the committees and the council, that there are issues that have feelings running high in town. But I do firmly believe that ultimately should be guided by the comprehensive plan.
I agree, it's both. I mean, you have to listen to the people, you have to listen to yourself, you have to see what the ordinances say. There are decisions that have been made just recently that people have been very upset about, but because the ordinance in the city guided the council certain ways, they had to follow the ordinance, whether they really wanted to or not. And some of those ordinances are being reviewed now so that we don't get into that same situation that we got into before. But it's a combination of everything. If we have issues that are kind of ambivalent or are not ambivalent, but that you don't really have a handle on yet, for instance, the influx of tourism in town and how do you find a balance, I would like to see city officials, the public, second homeowners, anybody that wants to come together in even a forum or some kind of way of talking about this before proposals come to the council so that we know where we all stand and how we can approach some of these issues together rather than the council making all of the decisions.
Well, I certainly think it is a matter of public input and being able to use the city rules and regulations and the comp plan, and also what the staff input is as they prepare the packets for the issues. Oftentimes, you don't hear about the opposition until after you've made the decision, which is unfortunate. But I feel like we just have to be able to trust our best judgment and make the decisions at the time.
Who's next?
You
Sorry,
threw off the
thank you.
rotation.
I threw off the rotation. I meant which candidate was next. So Nancy, historically, citizen advisory boards have played a significant role in the direction of Cannon Beach. How do you value citizen advisory boards? And I kind of want to clarify on this one. We've seen a recent movement towards, a movement or a proposal to strip some citizen advisory boards of their power, either give that to the city, the employees, or to bring it back to the top of the council. So how do you see the role of citizen advisory boards moving forward?
I think a citizen advisory board is just that. It's an advisory board. I think the recommendations from that advisory board should go to the council eventually. And the county, it's up to the council to make the decision. The advisory board does not make decisions, it makes recommendations. And then those recommendations follow a certain procedure and go to the city council.
Well, I think the advisory boards are very important, and oftentimes they're looking for people to fill those positions, but without public input, they're crucial in order to make many of the decisions that we need, especially with the budget committee and E-Prep.
Having just been involved in the discussion with the E-Prep on this very matter, I can say that I firmly believe that Citizens Advisory Board is exactly that, and it's really important. I think it's important to the city, it's important to the staff to get that input, but through the city council, and it's mostly important that the city council gets that input. I also do understand that there are concerns about, in particular with E-Prep, there were concerns that they were being very directly involved. And I think that it was satisfied to everybody that this was a citizens group, it should be a citizens group, and it's going to hopefully continue as that. City staff has its role, and the council ultimately is the boss of the city staff.
Okay, next question, and this goes to Brandon. I have my own special little referee over here. How do you balance Cannon Beach as a year-round home for residents and destination for tourists? In other words, how do you weigh the promotion of business against the sense of village?
It's tough for me. I admit that getting around town in the summer is difficult. It's something that I suppose many of us feel like it's something that we have to put up with. There's many folks that depend on that business for their livelihood, I myself included. So I'm conflicted at almost all times, but it's what we are. It's the town that we live in, and I think the best we can do to welcome people to this town and also at the same time try to create an atmosphere that is workable for those of us that live here would be the best way to approach it.
Okay.
I think this one is really important to everybody in town, but I personally am not sure that there's any kind of a conflict between the business part of town and the residential village part of town. One thing that strikes me is many of the business owners are really residents and part of this community, whether they live here in the evening and at night or not. They're here maybe the majority of their day, and they're part of this community. I think that, again, as I said earlier, our urban areas are growing and we get more and more visitors. Many of those visitors are coming year after year and spending time here. I think they're part of the community here as well. I do think that there are simple matters of infrastructure that we need to look at. I mentioned parking earlier. I have thought about this at length, and this is Oregon. Excuse me. Not too very long ago, I was in New Jersey. You have to pay to walk on the beach, period. I think this is Oregon. I don't think we want to be like that. But I do think in terms of parking, water, other infrastructure, there are things that we need to monitor.
It used to be that in November or December, when stores closed, you could tell what kind of summer it had been by how many stores had closed in Cannon Beach, Seaside, and Gearhart. Now, I don't see that happening so much, but the reason is that we're getting such an influx of tourists, and we're not, as I said earlier, we don't have an off-season anymore. It used to be we'd gear up sometime in May, and breathe a sigh of relief a little after Labor Day. I think I remember the story of John Fraser rolling the bowling ball down Hemlock and not hitting anybody on Labor Day. We couldn't possibly do that now. We don't have that much of an off season. I think we need to find a balance. I think we need to work with our Chamber of Commerce a little bit more and say, whoa, Nellie, let's see what we can do about this. And I know that Court has said that we aren't going to be working on getting more tourists in the summer. We're going to work on the shoulder seasons. But we really need to think seriously about how we as a village approach this situation. It's a very, very difficult situation to deal with, and we really together need to find some kind of solution.
Tracy? Herb. We have many duties up here. This is a big issue and a small question. What is the city's role in housing?
That is a big issue. It's not a small question. I'm not sure even after thinking about this for a lot, have a real sense of how much the city should be involved. I'm not a big fan of big government, but I do think government has a place in helping parts of our society that need a little more help. So when affordable housing was mentioned earlier, clearly that's an issue that's important not just here, but this county, the state, and around the country. I think that the city government has a role in, first I think, facilitating and looking for solutions before maybe it steps in most directly. My wife and I were in the San Juan Islands recently, and they have a very interesting land trust up there, and I've mentioned that to at least one of the councilors. I think that type of facilitation can be very constructive on the part of the city council.
Gee, thanks. Affordable housing is one of our major issues here in town. As Mike Benefield, the city councilor, pointed out last night, short-term rentals don't have anything to do with affordable housing, except if you turn your house into a short-term rental and you're deriving income from it, that house becomes more valuable to the next buyer or even to yourself. And as you pay more for that potential value, then your other houses then increase in value in town. So we constantly raise the affordability issue. We need affordable housing for our local firefighters, our police officers, our emergency personnel. We are facing emergencies, especially if there's a tsunami or anything else in town. So many of our first responders cannot live in town because they can't afford housing. So I think the city does have the responsibility to try to provide some housing for those first responders. Also, our local employees, how businesses are having a difficult time finding housing for local employees. Maybe they can help the city provide housing, buy housing, whatever they need to do. It's a difficult question. I'm not sure just how much the city should get involved, but there should be some participation.
Well, I've been on the housing task force for the past year. It's been active pretty much since last spring. I definitely think the city has a role in this. I'm not sure how big it should be, but I definitely think the city should at least facilitate the needs of both the business and the city itself, as Nancy mentioned. The first responders, the police, and many folks that work for the city are unable to afford houses here. I would like to see, as Nancy mentioned, business members being able to step up if they are that interested in having some type of housing for their employees. But maybe that is something that the city could partner with them on. Thanks.
Okay,
Nancy, the middle one, Nancy.
this question goes to Nancy first. Where do you see Cannon Beach 5 years down the road?
Well, that depends on how well we handle the problems we have today. If years down the road, will we be a high-end resort destination where only the rich and super rich or very wealthy can live and come to play? Or will we be a village that we have today of neighbors and family and people who know each other and care about each other? That is the problem that we're facing today, I think the major problem. I think some of the tourism that we have today is diluting the community spirit that we have all known for so long in this village. So 5 years from today, I think maybe we will have grappled with that problem, or we will become a tourist destination and we won't have our village anymore.
I see the fact that we've had to hire almost an entirely new staff in terms of a city manager, a city planner, the public works, and the police chief, as we've lost a lot of institutional knowledge in this town. And I think just that fact, it's going to change the city and the way it's governed. And it's up to the people that live here and the folks that sit on the city council to try to keep the character that this town has developed and built, and to ensure that it stays the way that we would like it, rather than just be changed through someone else governing the city that just didn't have their understanding and knowledge of the people that previously occupied those jobs.
I absolutely agree with what Brendan said in terms of having a city management that is, I hope, still learning and will continue to improve in community relations. And I think it's absolutely necessary the city council guide that. Where do I see us in 5 years? I would hope more or less where we're at now, but with a little more controls on the influx of people. Again, how you do that is very difficult. And we can't, in my opinion, turn this into a gated community. I think that, I know right now the the comprehensive plan calls for and identifies 3 separate areas really in Cannon Beach, and it has for a long time. One is tourism, and it's part of the economy of this town. And again, for that portion that's business, that's necessary. And we don't have other huge areas of income here. There's also a lot of retirement here, and that's a great thing and should be part of town. Maintaining the village atmosphere. I think all those things can go together. I think they can go together the way they have for quite some time now. I do think that the people who come for a day at a time and aren't really contributing to any of those areas, and again, the parking issues need to be addressed. But I hope we see ourselves more or less where we are now.
Okay, this next one is for Brandon, I believe. Right. Brandon, beginning with you. What makes Cannon Beach special to you personally?
Well, I love the ocean. I love to surf. And for me, it's the outdoor quality and the natural beauty and the people that live here. I've met the best people I've ever met in my life. I have neighbors that I know and am very happy to have around me. And I'm sure there's much more, but that's the general sense of well-being that I get from this town.
Well, again, this one's easy to start with. I would say my wife, her family. The scenic surrounding here is clearly amazing, and it's a draw. We have the beach, we have the forest, we have all of that. But I do think really it's the people, it's friends, it's acquaintances. It's the fact that you go down to get your mail and you get to chat with people, even if it's just the weather. It's great.
What they said. the beauty of this place is breathtaking. Even, 15 years of having lived here, every day I just kind of, oh my God, this is such a gorgeous place. But it's also the people and the ability to make a difference. You can do if you want to get involved, there's an immense array of opportunities here to get involved. It's not like living in a big city like Portland, where you hardly know anybody, maybe in your neighborhood. But here you can do whatever you really feel you want to do, creatively, professionally. It's a great place for opportunity, but the people here are fabulous. I mean, I have never met such great people as I have here in Cannon Beach. And like I say, I don't have a family. I am completely alone. So I consider everybody my family here. I know that sounds a little crazy, but I think this is really the best place on earth.
Okay, Herb, you get to go with this one first. What is your view on short-term rentals, and how do you think short-term rentals relate to housing in Cannon Beach?
I'll start with the second part. If we're talking about affordable housing, I think most of the short-term rentals have little to no bearing on affordable housing in town. And I'll say that because the median price in town of a home is $550,000. A monthly payment on that is in the vicinity of $3,500 a month or more. For affordable housing, we're talking about an income that's maybe half of that. If people don't rent their houses, many of them will just be second homes. They won't be filled. And even if they were to be rented, people are not going to rent them at a huge loss in a long-term rental. I think there may be some homes here where that would happen. As far as short-term rentals go, my wife runs a short-term rental management company in town, so I have a slight bias. I think she's great. I do think, though, that the local management companies who are hiring local people and putting them to work, and they're very involved in this community, are running things well and abiding by regulations. Can the regulations be improved? City Council is looking at that now, and I think they can. I think there is room for some control there, and I think the management companies agree with that.
As I mentioned earlier, I think there is a connection between short-term rentals and, not long-term rentals, but short-term rentals and the affordability of housing. I think Herb is right when he says take away the short-term rentals, you're not necessarily going to get more long-term rentals, because people use those houses when they're not renting them out. They use them as vacation homes or for whatever. So they aren't going to probably rent out long-term because then they wouldn't have a chance to come down and visit their own home. So there isn't that connection. But I think there is a connection between short-term rentals and the affordability of homes in general. I think that we do need to look at short-term rentals in terms of how we regulate them. The regulations, first of all, are crazy here in Cannon Beach. They've got 3 different regulations for short-term rentals, and they were done before the internet became so popular and before people could rent their house out via Airbnb and VRBO. So we need to look at those. Management companies are great because they do know the ordinances, they do follow them, and there are annual audits, but we need to get a handle on those online rentals.
I agree with Herb and Nancy in that short-term rentals don't have a direct bearing on affordable housing, in that, just like they said, people that have those aren't the type of people that are going to rent those homes to people that need them in an affordable way. But in terms of people that just rent their house out, I think there is something that could be done to approach people to try to incentivize renting houses to people that need it. I'm just not sure exactly what that is. The regulations, I feel, have been working somewhat, just like Nancy just mentioned. I think they are somewhat cumbersome in their three-tiered structure, and something easier, I think, could be more beneficial.
Okay, this next one starts with Nancy.
Yeah.
What is your vision? What is your vision for the former Cannon Beach Elementary School property?
As you drive into on the north side of Cannon Beach, one of the first things you see is that property. I would like to see it purchased by the city because we need to preserve that. It's part of our history. It's the site of a Clatsop Nehalem Indian Village. Yes, we have Nakoos Park now, so we do have part of it preserved. But we have the school buildings and we have that school property. I think the city is looking at possibly spending around $400,000 to purchase that property. In this town, oceanfront property at $400,000, that size is a gold mine. So, I mean, granted, you can't do a lot with it because it's zoned institutional, but it's our history, and I think it needs to be preserved. I would like to see the school buildings, if we could use them. I don't know that if it's going to be affordable to refurbish those school buildings, but if we can't, then we need to I'd like to see something there, like a community center or an arts center. Billy Hultz and Michael Burgess dreamed of having an art center there, and I would like to see that dream carried out.
I too would like to see at least the gymnasium used as some type of structure for the public for performances and gatherings. When it was the school, that was really something when they had the annual get-togethers for the singing and things like that. I think it's important for the community to have a place like that to gather. It's nice to be in here, but something big where some sort of event could take place, I think would be really nice.
I personally feel that the city has an opportunity to get a piece of land that, as Nancy said, is one of the first things you see when you come in. I think it's really important. The school clearly has nostalgic and historical impact. I also know that that is well within the tsunami zone. And so I think that a park for the majority of that area would be fantastic. I love parks. I'd like to see us have more parks everywhere. I also think that if there is going to be a structure there, and I think that's certainly worth looking at and considering that it should be something that takes that tsunami zone into effect and does not gather large groups of people for long periods of time. If it's to be a cultural or historical display, if there are going to be events there that are smaller, lower key, I agree with that. I think it'd be a fantastic spot to have those, considering that it's in that tsunami zone.
Okay, we're about halfway done. Brandon. Correct?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, what is the importance of an elementary school returning to Cannon Beach?
I, having raised a daughter here in town, my wife works for the Seaside School District. I really missed it when the school went away. I think it's very important to have one. Having said that, it's also very important to have it out of the tsunami zone. And to be able to find a place like that in Cannon Beach is very difficult. It'll be very expensive to build, to develop, but I definitely support the folks that are trying to get the academy going. I just see it as a very difficult proposition, and I don't have an answer for that. I'm a supporter of the new school that is to possibly be built in the tsunami safe zone, and I don't know if that puts me at odds with that, but I think it's important for the community to have a place for its children to go to school.
I strongly support the idea of an elementary school in town. I think it's part of a community, and I certainly hope it happens. And I'll just be very brief on this because I think we're all going to be in agreement. It has to be out of the tsunami zone.
I support having a school here, it'd be great. I think it does need to be out of the tsunami zone. But if our only choice is to have a charter school, then it needs to be well-financed. And it needs to be, it really needs to be well thought out. I know that charter school supporters have had a rough time the past few years trying to get one established. And I just hope that if they do establish it, that it is properly financed and that they go slowly so that we can continue to build on successes. But yes, it needs to be out of the tsunami zone. I would like to see an elementary school here because we don't want to be just a retirement community. We want to see young families here if they can afford the houses. So we have a lot of different things that we need to deal with and a lot of loose ends to tie up. But if we can get that, the houses to be affordable, and then we can also maybe bring in an elementary school, we'd have the community that we've had here for so many years.
All right, we just have two more. So if anybody out there is thinking about asking a question, get it ready, warm it up. And so here we go. So this one goes to Herb, I believe. Do you support a significant expansion in public parking?
No, not at all. I think, first of all, that parking is a very complex issue, and whatever my feelings about it are, or might be, I think that parking studies have to be done before any decisions are made. Having traffic engineers is crucial. When I was working for the Port of Astoria, I was involved for them with Astoria's going through some of their traffic plans, and I learned, study. My gut feeling is that if anything, what we really need to do is to monitor the parking we have now. I don't know if I'd say less parking, but I would say less parking where there shouldn't be parking, where they're not supposed to be parking right now. And that's a matter partially of enforcement, which is always an issue with many of the things in town. And I understand that the city right now is looking to get an enforcement officer, and I personally think our police department does a great job. But I think it's also up to Public Works to make sure we put more signage saying, don't park here. Then enforce it. And I think that would alleviate a lot of the issues that we have had.
And there was that old saying, if you build it, they will come. They're gonna come anyway, so we need to help it. We need to do something. There's been discussion about whether we should charge for parking. Should there be paid parking? Should there be timed parking? I'm on the fence on that. I'm not real sure. There's also been some discussion about using some of the lodging taxes that we get to build a parking garage, possibly on the property near the recycling center. I don't know. And then charging people to park there. It's a huge investment to do that. That's an extremely costly, I think $50,000 a parking space. That's what Seaside was looking at when they were talking about building a parking garage. $50,000 a space. So I don't know how feasible that is. But we probably do need to do something, but it does have to be very well thought out. And I think Herb's right, we do need to study that very carefully.
Well, all the time that I spent on the planning commission, that issue was brought up every year because it was just part of the job. And parking studies have been done, and the answer is the town is full. I don't know how to say it any simpler. There is nowhere to put any more parking spots unless you would be willing to go on to where the sewer ponds are now located, and that as I was glad to see the last time that was brought up, citizens came out en masse and said, no, they don't want a parking lot out there. So it will come again, someone will propose it, and because it's the easiest, cheapest place to put a parking lot. So for anybody that's concerned about that, I would just say, please make your voice heard.
Okay, this will be the last question before we ask audience members to participate. And we're starting with Nancy. You frequently hear people say that Cannon Beach has a unique way of doing things. How do you define the Cannon Beach way?
Oh, great. Well, Cannon Beach is full of characters, and we love characters. The Cannon Beach way of doing things, I think we take the environment into consideration a lot when we do things. I think one of those examples would be the establishment of the Cola Forest walk, or the trail. I think that was one of those unique things that we did. Granted, it was a vote of maybe 12 voters. It passed by 12 votes, but we did it. And we raised $4 million in a recession, one of the greatest recessions we've had in the country. So that's what we do. We also passed a resolution. We were the only city council in the state of Oregon to pass a resolution asking President Bush to, asking the Congress to get rid of President Bush, or whatever it was that we did. Anyway, we do things our way, and we aren't going to let anybody tell us differently. And I think that's good. I think we are thinkers, and I want to see us remain thinkers. I don't want to see a bunch of sheep out there. I think we need to stay independent. We need to think of our environment. We need to think of the way we want to live and the village that we want to create.
Well, there are a lot of different ways to get things done, and my feeling about Cannon Beach is that a lot of civic participation is what really drives the best decisions, and for people to be able to make their voices heard at the right time is crucial. You know, sometimes you'll sit in meetings and nobody will be there, and I can't stress how important it is if you feel impassioned about an issue that's going to come up for a vote, please participate. It's so important. And that's one of the ways, at least I feel, that some of the best decisions have been made in this town.
I was trying to make a list of what questions might be asked before this evening, and that was one of the questions I thought might come up. And I agree, it comes down to the people and the process here. I was sitting here looking out, and I thought about asking you to raise your hands but I can see city councilors, past and present. I can see planning commissioners, past and present. I can see people who have been on parks committees. I can see people who volunteered with the chamber and just about everything else in town sitting here. Some of you I may not know, but you probably were involved as well. So probably everybody here would put their hand up for involvement. And I think that's fantastic, and I hope that continues.
Okay, now the way we'll handle audience questions is we'll ask you to come down here. We'll give you the microphone. And we would ask you to try not to repeat questions that have already been asked unless you need further clarification. Remember, you're asking each candidate the same question. And does anybody have any questions about asking questions? Okay, so if you want to ask a question, come on down here. There always has to be a first. Good job, Carolyn. Closing time.
Thank you. Let me see, I've got it in my pocket here. My question is, Cannon Beach needs a bridge over Ecola Creek that will survive an earthquake in order to evacuate the downtown area quickly. The cost is estimated between $1 million and $2 million. Do you think our citizens should be asked to pay for this bridge through the city budget? Or do you think the businesses that bring thousands of visitors to Cannon Beach should step up to help those visitors survive a tsunami? Excuse me.
And we'll start with Brandon.
Thank you, Karen. I think it should be a combination of any money that the city could get from the federal government or the state government. And certainly, if there was a way to get visitors to contribute to it, would be a great idea. But I'm also pretty certain that there'd have to be some sort of bond measure passed in order to get something like that paid for.
From my experiences at the board and dealing with the infrastructure there, it has to be a combination of multiple things. The city will have to put in, it will have to contribute. The citizens will to some extent, but mostly the city budget. While I was on the budget committee, year after year, this would get discussed and it was a high priority. And I think I was on it during maybe a couple of the leaner years where not much got put aside. I would hope that comes back into play and we put that money aside. You need to have it to get matching grants. And here's the big part of it. It would be state and federal grants. There are many available specifically for transportation. And I think that if the city can show it's doing its share, and it can be a very small share comparatively, that those grants can become available.
I know this has been an issue that has been discussed for many years, and I think an e-web grant was sought and not received. So state grants have been proposed. Hopefully they will become available eventually. The city, if the bridge is approved, and the city would have to contribute, it probably would be a bond measure. The question was whether or not businesses should be asked to participate, and I think through the property taxes that they pay, there may be something that could be done that way. I don't know. Putting out a jar on the counter isn't going to work. So I don't know how you would ask businesses to participate. There would have to be some process for that, but there would have to be a bond measure for that.
Come on over. How many of you are planning on asking questions? Okay, you want to come closer here? I didn't recognize you. New hair. Okay,
Hi.
who is this woman?
So I actually have so many questions, it's hard for me to pick which one to start with. But you know what, I do have a question about the park.
Mic closer. Just closer.
Oh, is that better? Am I working?
Yeah, close.
Hello.
There you go.
So I do have a question specifically about parking. So I understand that we have been dealing with this issue for years. This summer was not the first time we've had visitors, and I've heard it for years. We need to do something. I don't know what, but we need to do something. So if in fact you have a traffic study done and all the professionals say you need a parking garage in the back by the recycle center where it affects no one, what will you do? Because we need that.
That's a hypothetical that I'm not sure I know how to answer. I think when I say studies, I'm talking more in terms of traffic patterns and things like, I think it was mentioned earlier tonight, timed parking downtown. Again, my gut feeling is that maybe parts of downtown should be 1 or 2 hour parking. We have people now who are coming down again for the day, maybe more than the people who are longer term visitors or business people or employees or residents who come down and they can park downtown and go down to the beach and spend the day on the beach and then go away. And those other groups I've mentioned have trouble. We all have trouble getting our mail in the middle of summer. I think that's a fairly easy thing to look at. I also think a fairly easy thing is to increase posting of no parking in the areas that should be no parking. I know that it's been brought up several times this summer about the S-curves and how it seemed to me it was more than ever before. Those are bike lanes. Maybe if they're marked with bicycles and no parking, that would alleviate some of it. And again, I think enforcement would be crucial, but I think those are all fairly easy fixes that can be done without studies.
I think the question was, if there's a parking garage proposed, or the study says a parking garage is needed, what would we do? I would really have to ask how we're going to finance it. And we would have to ask people in the town, how do you want this, and do you want to finance it? Because it would probably have to go to a bond measure, I would think. And again, depending how big it is and how expensive it is, these things can be pretty darn expensive. So, and we would probably charge for parking in the garage to help pay for it, but that's not going to pay for it. So we could use we could use some lodging taxes for it. I don't know that would go as far as it needs to go to pay for it, but it would really depend on what people think, how I would approach that.
I liken that to the same type of arrangement that has been brought up in the past, and that if we as a community want to decide that we want more parking regardless of where it's put, we're going to have to come together and decide that as a community. I would like it if somebody could just magically say this is where we should put something, it's a great location and it's cheap, but that isn't going to happen. It's a difficult decision, and we're going to just have to muddle through it as best we can to come up with a solution.
I'd love it if they repainted those bike lanes on the S curves instead of make them BMW parking lanes. That'd be nice. Sorry. I guess my question is more about process. How do you balance public perception and opinion in your decision-making process versus evidence gathering and fact-based information?
It's your turn, Nancy.
Well, I do that. I still do that a lot when I write a story. You have to combine everything: public perception. What does the ordinance say that's governing the issue that you are making a decision on? What does your gut tell you? You're a resident in the town too. How do you feel about that as a resident in the town? How is that going to affect you? You can't make a decision based on bias. But you have to make a decision based on all kinds of input. And again, what does that ordinance say? How can you, what must you do according to the local law? So it's a combination of getting evidence, and sometimes you can't do that. Some of these decisions you make, you can't gather evidence. There's some judicial procedures that we do that we just can't go out and gather our own evidence. It has to be presented to us. So it really depends on the issue. It depends on what the ordinance says. It depends on whether you're in a quasi-judicial situation or whether you're making a decision as a counselor. There's a lot of different things that go into that, but it is definitely a balance.
Well, as they say, perception is everything. It's not how to articulate this well, but it's something I definitely take into account. I want to make a decision that is perceived as unbiased and well thought out. And that's how I go about my thought process and gathering information and talking to people when it's appropriate.
I think it's an excellent question. I think it's a difficult task. I agree wholeheartedly with everything that's been said, and it's a balance. I think that's a word that I should have used a lot this evening and wanted to, because I think that's important in life. I think it's a balance. It's made more difficult sometimes because even the input you get from people can be hard to understand. We have some folks who attend many of the meetings in town, and they're very passionate, and rightfully so, about life in Cannon Beach. But sometimes you don't know what everybody else is thinking, and there might be a quiet group that thinks something different. Hard to tell. Sometimes you hear things in one part of town, and you don't hear them in the other part. Which parts do you listen to? So balance. You listen to input, you absorb what you can, you look at the ordinances and the comprehensive plan and try to make the best decision you can. Ultimately, I think it comes down to each and every one of us would have to have our conscience and follow that.
Other questions? Come on up.
I heard Nancy discuss the cannabis issue. There's two propositions on the ballot this year in Cannon Beach regarding cannabis. Can you each address how you would vote on each one?
And whose turn is it?
Brandon.
It's Brandon's turn.
If I could, I'm going to have to admit that I don't know the wording of the ballot measures. If you could state them for me. I know one of them is involving.
One involves the sales tax on retail outlets. Should it be voted on? And George, is George around? Can you help me with the other? It's a vote to prohibit retail dispensaries in Cannon Beach. And if you vote yes, then you would be voting to prohibit retail dispensaries, the licensing of retail dispensaries in Cannon Beach. And if you vote no, you would be permitting the...
Probably easier just to say where you stand.
Well, it's an important, I think.
It's important because they word it so that it's.
George, do you have any more?
That's what it's worded.
Is that right? Okay.
I
Do you need more
apologize.
information?
Just a little clarification on that.
Okay.
If
I'm not sure I can.
I'll add. I'm like,
Yeah,
I mean, like.
yes vote, then you.
We don't need to see your ballots. We want to know how you feel. So I mean, like, do you support dispensaries in Cannon Beach, and if so, do you support an added tax?
That I can answer easily.
Okay.
Yes, I support dispensaries, and yes, I support an added tax.
Additional, Brandon, on top of what the state charges? I think that's the question. I don't need to interrupt it. Just to be clear that that's the question.
Yes, I do support that.
Yeah, as far as my own ballot goes, I've never told anybody about any of my ballots, but as far as the issues go, I'd be happy to answer that. It's legal in the state of Oregon. I think it passed by approximately 63% when it was made legal in Oregon. I found it a little interesting that there was people who said, well, it was made legal, but nothing about dispensaries. If you go back and look at the ballot measure that passed, as opposed to the law that it actually got enacted, the ballot measure itself did clearly indicate that dispensaries would be, or shops, stores, would be a part of that. And 63% of the citizens here voted for that. It's going to be on the ballot, and the citizens will decide. If it is decided that a storefront is going to be allowed in town, then yes, I think the 3% tax should be collected and used in the city of Cannon Beach for good purposes. I'm not sure I see the difference between two entities of the OLCC and why one type of store regulated by OLCCs should be treated any differently than the other. I also think it will be partially market driven. If there's a demand in town, then hopefully there would be a store that would be in good taste and fit in with town. If there's not a demand, there won't be a store.
I have already said that I support the idea of a dispensary in town if somebody wants to actually open one up. And I do support the tax, the 3% tax. We charge taxes we have liquor taxes, we have franchise taxes on electricity and cell phone towers. So why not a tax on marijuana?
Other questions? Okay, go.
The city recently did a public survey, and I'd like to know what each of you think the value of that survey is to the city council.
And
what impact it should have.
Yeah.
Well, having studied and been involved in both surveys like that and the ultimate goal of that survey, which was to come up with a strategic plan, I think first of all it was something that was needed. I think the strategic plan is an important tool for the city council to give sort of more long-term direction to the city manager and then from there to the staff. The city manager works for the city council, but also needs to have clear medium to long-term direction. Could it have been done a little differently, a little better? I think there's always room for improvement. There were one or two questions that I think could have been written in a way that maybe didn't come up with such a direct answer. The process afterwards, I felt, could have used maybe one more public hearing. I did understand that the city council was involved in this process for quite a long time, and for them they had felt this was enough. I also know that the city council felt that this was a tool of theirs with the city manager, and I know that they did make efforts to have public input. So again, could there have been some improvements to it? That's true with everything. But having a strategic plan, I think, was a worthy goal, and I think it can be built on.
I think the strategic plan, Brenda and I both sat through 2 days of development of the strategic plan. There was a huge amount of conversation about various issues and the defining of what a strategic plan is and how it would be used, and then the development of the goals in the strategic plan. It's a roadmap for the city manager, for the city council, and it's not only a roadmap, but it gives deadlines. And as somebody who's worked with deadlines for 50 years, I understand the importance of deadlines. You're not going to accomplish anything unless you know where you're going. And if we want the city to have particular goals in mind and accomplish those goals, we need to have some kind of a plan to get there. The survey caused an awful lot of consternation in the city, and I think it could have been done better. First of all, some of the people in Tolovana Park didn't get one at all, and they are part of Cannon Beach. I think it was done because somebody said, oh, we only have one zip code. Well, actually, we have 2 zip codes, one in Tolovana Park and one in Cannon Beach, or in the northern part of Cannon Beach. And some of the questions were a little strange. I thought they could be more localized than what they were. It was a good first attempt, I think. And with the information that the city has received about the survey, the next time it's done, which I think will be in a couple of years, maybe they can refine that survey and get the addresses right and so that everybody can get them. And some people don't get them 2 or 3 times, and some people not get them at all. So there does need to be some refinement, but I think the overall outcome was a good outcome. I think you have a good strategic plan for the council to work on, and hopefully we can get more people involved before the city council develops another strategic plan.
I agree with Nancy. I think it was very important. It's hard, I think. I thought the same thing when I initially saw the survey. It just didn't seem to pertain to immediate issues, that I felt like there needed to be a place to write out a response about how I felt about things. In that way, it seemed sort of impersonal, but taken as an aggregate, it seemed to point out some issues about how people felt about their trust in government, law enforcement. Can you remember some of the other ones, Nancy?
Affordable housing.
Affordable housing was on there, and it's hard to establish whether that's really how the whole town feels or if that's just a statistical sampling. But like Nancy said, I think it's a good starting point. I think the result that came of it was certainly good in terms of a visioning exercise for the city, and I'd like to see it continue.
I kind of want to follow up on that, and this is for everyone, of course. I'm one of those people in Tollabona Park where I was at the time that didn't get to participate in the survey, so I'm a little, dubious of the results. But nonetheless, when they talk about a citizen satisfaction with City Hall and city government that's under 40%, where is that disconnect, and what do you do to fix that?
Nancy, go.
I think it's something that Brandon touched on earlier, and that is that we've had such a huge change in management in City Hall. We went one year, a couple of years ago, I think we had, 5 managers? The police chief, the city manager, quite a few people, the city planning director, they all left in the same year. And so that institutional memory really needed to be built back up, and that's the process that we're in now, building that memory, and people need to provide the input to do that. I also think that some of the city officials that have been hired in the last 2 or 3 years should go out and get to know the community. Now, that may not be part of their job description, but I think they need to go to community events, potlucks, gatherings, coaster theater, whatever. They need to go out and meet the people that they are trying to help in this community. And I think that's where some of the disconnect has come from, is that people knew who their city manager was, they knew who their police chief was, although the police chief does do a good job in getting out for the most part. But the city planner, they need to know these people, and they lived in the community. And sometimes they can't, nowadays you're not required to live in the community, and the city planner, for instance, has established himself in Astoria. But we need to have people go out into the community so that they get to know who the people are that they're maybe trying to talk to over the phone and what their concerns are.
That's very well said, Nancy. I personally don't feel that low of a sense of dissatisfaction with our city government. I'm a bit biased in that I participated in it as a volunteer and would like to continue to do so. But I would urge anybody that is that dissatisfied to make their voice heard. It's the only way things will change.
I actually have heard a fair bit of, I don't know if I call it dissatisfaction, but thinking that maybe the communications and relations between city management and the citizens could be better. I agree. I'd probably agree no matter who was there, because I think it's really important. It's very hard as well. The relationship between city council, city management and staff, and the citizens is often seen as very complex. I think it comes down to communication. Basically, I think the communication could be better. I think it should be better. How do you get to that point is hard to tell, and I think it takes efforts on both sides. I think citizens need to welcome and teach, I guess would be the word I'd use, city staff that might be newer and not have that institutional memory. I think it is also crucial that the city council makes it an expectation of their employee and that employee's employees that this community relations, this community involvement it's crucial to the job anywhere, but certainly here.
Other questions? Tracy?
Did I stand up?
Yes, you do. And who are you going to ask first?
Oh, shoot. It's...
Brandon. Brandon.
Are you sure?
Yeah, that last one.
Shoot, I got all caught up. I've heard talks about the empty, or the children's center, since it's empty, I think, right now, being turned into affordable housing. And I was curious if you thought that was a viable use of that property. And if yes, what do you see happening with Tolovana Hall?
Well, I do have, is this still, okay. And being on the Affordable Housing Task Force, it is something that's been brought up, and the viability of using the structure was deemed not able to do that. So it would have to be torn down, and it was brought up as a possibility to build, I think, maybe 10 or so units for affordable housing. And I do support that. I support the fact that there's a community center there as well. I would like to see that stay there.
I think a community center is definitely an important aspect of life in town. And I'm also a little leery about the city directly being financially responsible for affordable housing in terms of buying, owning, running. I think that is more up to the private sector with city guidance and help, certainly. But I just think, for example, I know they're thinking about smaller dwelling units in the trailer park. I think that's a great idea. It's not direct city involvement. It would provide monetary return and provide benefit to those that need it. But to have the city, and I'm not suggesting this is what's being planned at all, but I wouldn't like to see the city say, okay, we're going to buy this and rent it out.
Well, I've attended those Affordable Housing Committee meetings that Brandon is on, and it's been a very big struggle for the city to come up with any space whatsoever for affordable housing. I do support the building of affordable housing where the Children's Center is now. The question is, do they expand that to include Tolovana Hall? Tolovana Hall is, again, one of those places that makes our village the village. And I'm a little bit on the edge on that. But I do see the possibility of moving what we see Tolovana Hall as to the school property and having that become the community/arts center. It would actually provide more room, and it might provide a little more flexibility in programming. That's a decision that the community is going to have to make. We're going to all have to discuss that thoroughly. But we do need affordable housing, and if we ask a developer to come in and do that on private land, it will no longer be affordable because the land is too expensive to build on. by the time you build on it and then buy the land and then build on it, it doesn't become affordable anymore. So the city does have to have some participation in that. And the city doesn't have much of its own land, unless you talked about the south side, south wind side, but then you're also talking about millions and millions of dollars to put infrastructure there. So they've struggled with this, and I think this is still a question that's up for debate.
Just $5.
I know, just a quick follow-up. I just had a question because I had also heard the affordable for that property was incomes of around 60,000.
The median income, 50,
medium,
50
52 is what you said, Nancy. And from people that I talked to, you know, people who are working in the retail and also working at restaurants, and people who are working at other jobs, that's not their income. And so I just, out of curiosity, when you're talking affordable, are you looking at that 52,000, or are we looking at something that would be more affordable for people that are working in more of the service jobs?
I don't have an answer on this one. I don't think anybody does. It's as I said earlier, it's a problem. It's a big problem, and it's not just a problem here. It's throughout the country. Where do you start? You have to pay higher wages, but that's not doable. Buy more land. Well, we don't have any. I simply don't have an answer, and I think it's going to take a community-wide effort and, frankly, a state and national effort to address this nationally, and we will find our solutions locally. Again, I think it's going to be something that's outside the box. I kind of hate that phrase, but I think it's going to be something that none of us have thought about right now, and somebody's going to say, what about this? And we'll all go, well, yeah. And I think it's going to take private investment. And by that, I don't necessarily mean business, I mean donations.
In terms of the income level, this is not low-income housing. It's not Section 8, it's not low-income house, it's not Shorewood, it's not anything like that. It's for people who make that middle income. The the national standard is 30% of your income goes for housing. And at that level, according to a study that our city attorney did 2 or 3 years ago, the $52,000 mark is what. But again, I don't think you have to make $52,000, you could probably make less than that, but it's not low-income housing.
I would like to clarify this a little bit. What we've been discussing at the Affordable Housing Task Forces would be a recommendation to the City Council, and specifically to the site at the Children's Center, that the income wasn't attached to that specific site, but we've been talking about workforce housing, and I think the income threshold would be less than the 50,000 that's been stated. I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how much.
Right. Gonna go, I think we've got 2 more questions, and then Les says we need to stop, so.
So I'm number 1.
You're number 1.
Okay, so my question is, what does your ideal Chamber of Commerce look like for Cannon Beach? And also, could you comment on the relationship you see between the city and the Chamber?
I'm not sure I have an ideal in mind for a Chamber of Commerce. I worked with Chambers of Commerce for many years now. I happen to think that the Chamber right now is doing pretty well in most areas. I think, having watched them just the other night at City Council, they've got some people who are very well spoken and present their ideas. I think that the Chamber, you know, the old phrase, hoist by their own petard, victim of their own success in a way when it comes to summer. And I'm glad to hear that they may be looking more at shoulder and off-season efforts. I'm sorry, the second part of your question was? The relationship between the city and the chamber. It's complicated. Having been exposed to that during the budget hearings and the budget committee, I know they're tied together. I think to some extent there's a need for the chamber to be tied to the city because the city gets income from tax dollars. The city provides money for the chamber, but they also provide a lot of money for the visitor center. I'm not sure that everybody knows how different those two things are. I, again, will come back to, actually, I think that right now they're doing pretty well.
Question was not only the relationship, but what's
your ideal chamber?
My ideal chamber would be a chamber of commerce that is supported by the businesses that it serves, and not so much by the city. That would be my ideal. A chamber of commerce that is actively supporting businesses, brings in, well, that's, the problem is with our chamber is that we have a chamber of commerce and we have a visitors bureau. But they tend to merge. At least it seems that nobody realizes we actually have a visitors bureau. I like the Seaside model in that you have a chamber of commerce separate. They're in the same building, but they have a separate executive director. They have a separate staff. When you walk in that building, you know that on the right is the visitors bureau and on the left is the chamber of commerce. And they really have different missions and different goals. And I think we are getting to that point here in Cannon Beach where we need to do something like that. So that when our city money goes to the, quote, chamber, it's going to the Visitors Bureau and not to the chamber, which should be supported by the businesses, I think. I think that lodging taxes, this chamber has not only gotten money from the city, but it's gotten money from the Tourism and Arts Committee as well. And I think that really needs to be reviewed because I think that we need to really establish what our goals should be for both the visitor center and we can't establish the goals for the chamber because the chamber is really kind of a 501c6, I think. So there needs to be some kind of separation between the chamber and the Visitors Bureau.
I guess my ideal Chamber of Commerce would be a group that took citizen input from the businesses that they support, as well as the city and the community that is directly impacted from the result of tourism. You know, it's like I said before, it's the way it is in this town. But in terms of how the city works with it, I definitely think they have a role in working with the Chamber of Commerce. And I wasn't familiar with how they were separated. I agree with Nancy's statement about that.
Yeah.
Can I make a clarification?
Can you make a clarification? Sure. A quick clarification.
Okay, I just want to make a clarification. As having sat on the chamber board for the last 7 years and the city council for the last 3 years, there really is no mix. The city financially supports the information center 100%. That money only is not mixed in with the chamber. That money is used and accounted for specifically for the information center. So there really isn't a comfort. There is a mix of staff and people because they're right there together. And the director of the Chamber of Commerce is also the director of the information center. That is true. But as far as the city supporting the chamber financially, that's not happening. The money that the chamber gets from the city is from the information center is one. That's a separate check, $35,000 a quarter. and the other money that the city gets is the 70% of the new 1% tax. And that, this chamber is getting that, not because the city is doing any favors for the chamber, but rather because the state law mandates that the money, that 70% of that new 1% tax has to go toward putting heads in beds. The city could do that on their own if they chose, but the city chose to use the chamber, which was the best body in this community to execute that. The city has a 1-year contract with the chamber at this point, and at the end of that contract, it can be renewed or not.
Thanks, George. Okay, I forgot we had a question back here, so we're going to. But
I wanted to thank you folks for making it hard to vote. And I wish we had a national forum that was as respectful and kind and wonderful as you guys have been and you guys have been, so thank you. Really stupid, tough question. Who's the other one you're going to vote for?
I think we have a secret ballot.
That's right. Don't answer, but you made it really hard. I hope whoever is not the winner gets to run again and be supported because you're all excellent.
So you know what? As you said, Brandon, we have had a great deal. I don't know how to work this.
Just speak well.
As you said, we've had a great deal of change at the city over the last bit of time. We've lost some amazing people. We have new people in. And this is somewhat hypothetical, sort of. If the previous staff that we've had at the city has allowed something to happen that has been a safety issue for our citizens. Hypothetically speaking, let's say they allowed someone to connect outside of the city limits to water. And they've known that this has happened for a long time, and it's a health and safety issue for one of our citizens. And they've all been aware of it for years. Do you think that the city has a right to go back on what they have allowed and now force someone to not have water, when the city was well aware that this was happening for several years? If the city made a decision and they found out that they shouldn't have, do you think they have a right to harm a citizen and change their mind? Hypothetically speaking.
Herb?
I think it's your turn. Just as I don't discuss my ballot, I'm really loath to discuss a hypothetical, especially one that doesn't sound all that hypothetical. So that sounds like something that I would have to decide based on merits that I saw in front of me in more detail. Also, I did want to say a quick thank you. I've said thank you to many people, but I wanted to say a thank you to the current city council. Whether I agree or disagree with them on everything is a moot point. Sitting here this evening, I'm getting a taste of the difficulties, and so thank you to them for their time.
Thanks, Herb. I'm not going to probably discuss a hypothetical, not so hypothetical, not knowing any of the issues or what the situation was at the time. I think that's something that if it comes up and it comes up before the city council,
It's mostly a matter of if our city should keep its word, is really what the question is.
Again, I think I'm probably going to pass on that question. I do want to thank everybody for coming here today, taking time out of your night, especially before we prepare for a big storm this weekend, and being interested enough in our candidacy to ask us some pretty tough questions. And I have buttons out there if anybody wants them.
You don't have to answer either, Brandon. Go ahead.
I'll give an answer. It just won't probably be the one you want to hear. Something like that comes up all the time in this town. Somebody feels slighted. The city did something. You're put in a terrible position of having to defend something that, on the face of it, might be indefensible. And that's just part of the process that you have to go through as a city council member. And it's a perfect example of just wanting to pull the covers up over your head. But, you know, you just have to make a decision as best you can, given the information that's provided to you, and try not to impose your own bias on it. And I'd also like to thank every one of you for coming, and would love to hear your input. Thank you.
So the message tonight is you're going to vote, and you're going to vote smart, and you're going to stay involved in Cannon Beach. Thank you for coming.